No matter your age, your plan for retirement can start today. From the News Channel 5 Network, this is the Retirement Report.
Good morning. Welcome to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. We're going to be talking this morning about risk in retirement, and in reality, it's not just risk in retirement. This applies leading up to retirement. This is one of those that's going to apply to most everyone saving for retirement at whatever age you are, as well as, of course, becomes even more important the closer you get to retirement and into retirement, when preserving those assets and making sure you're staying ahead of inflation becomes even more and more important. So you understand, when it comes to saving for retirement, the younger you are, you can leave the money alone. You can go through periods of volatility without concern, as long as you're invested properly. Important little caveat there. But as long as you're invested properly, you can ride out the volatility. You've got time. You're not going to be touching the money. You're just going to be living off your income, and if anything, pumping money into those retirement savings. However, when you get closer to retirement, now you've got to be thinking, especially if you've done well and you've been able to get enough money, you've saved enough now to where you can live on that in retirement. In other words, a combination of Social Security, if you have a pension or whatever income streams may be available to you. If you take those together and you add in what income you can take from your portfolio safely, and that's going to be at a rate of around 3 to 5%, depending on how you're invested, again, that's very important, then you would be able, at that point, then it's like, well, how can I do that and minimize risk, make sure I don't go backwards, basically. I had a client in recently, and one of the things that I remember her asking is, when do you know that you have enough? When do you know that I've made it? I can now, relax a little bit on the savings side and maybe look towards retirement. Maybe I can now say, okay, I can start thinking, what year is this going to be, and be able to retire and enjoy life more, do some things that I haven't been able to do when I've been working and haven't had as much time. And the answer, of course, is, you know that you're there when you've won the race, so to speak. When we sat down with her and we did an analysis, I was able to show her that, in fact, you would be able to support yourself, to be able to have enough in retirement, your Social Security and the income that you have from your investments, compared to your living expenses, the amount of earnings, and at that point we were able to, for just earning 4% on her money, which by the way is easily done. We do this all the time. I do reviews with clients, which I'll talk about as well, each from quarterly to annual at the least, and whenever we're doing reviews, we're always seeing rates of returns that range typically for anywhere from 4% to sometimes 9% or more, and that's over the long period. I'm talking about over an 8 or 10 year period. In the short term, especially lately with the market being, we're seeing much greater returns. But here's the idea. We look to put together a plan first. What can we do as far as our savings? How much do we need to earn on our investments? What's that needed rate of return to make sure that we're able to maintain our standard of living and quality of life throughout our lifetime, for us, for our spouse, if we're married, accomplish other financial goals with regard to maybe other children, grandchildren, whatever it might be. So we do all of that in the analysis that we do for folks, and when we do that, we then show them how their money's going to grow each year, or the reverse, if they haven't done as well, and sometimes we have these conversations where they're saying, I know you'd like to retire in 2 years, but the reality is, if you retire in 2 years, based on what you've done up to this point, even with the improvements that I can help you with, there's a good chance you could run out of money in 10, 12, 15 years. And when we're looking at retirement, we're usually looking at 20 to 30 years in retirement. Had a gentleman in just this week, mid-50s, you're looking at, and this is not uncommon. I work a lot with federal employees and the military. These folks, some of these folks have 30, 40 years of service already. Sometimes they have to retire out. In other words, they're not allowed to stay, to keep that job past 30 years as an example, and they're forced out. And so they might still be in their mid-50s, and they have to retire from their government service or from the type of job that they have in that situation. So what we're looking at is, again, maybe 30 plus years in retirement. Do they have enough money to last that long? Well, that's one of the things that we answer for them. So if you're going to run out in 15 years, obviously we have a problem. Now, some, when they have their pensions, may only be 20 to 30% of what they earned when they were working. And even when you combine that with Social Security, the combination of those may only amount to about 60% of what they earned when they were working. Well, it's kind of hard, all right, to go out into the world with about half of what you've been making and still maintain that same standard of living. So a lot of times these folks are looking at possibly working in retirement depending on how much they have been able to save. Because if they're trying to make all that up from savings, they need to have been really good savers, right? Now, many of the clients that do come in, they're really good savers. They've done well in that regard. So then we start talking about the concerns, the risks that they're going to deal with, and that's what the show's about today. And those risks, number one of the biggest risks I hear from people is that of what is known as capital risk. It can also be referred to as market risk or even just volatility. And in this one, what we're looking at is the possibility that we might lose our money. So a lot of people are very concerned about the stock market after what happened in the bear market period, or the decade between 2000 and 2009. In particular, if they weren't positioned well, if they were really strong in large caps, or if they were maybe invested in companies that went out of business or mutual funds that are no longer around, they may have taken some pretty big hits. So they're pretty nervous about the market. I have people coming in, they said, you know, I got out at that time, and now I've seen the market really go up, and I regret it, but I'm afraid now that it's up as high as it is, I'm afraid to get back in. And this is another valid concern. So the question is putting a plan together that regardless of what's going on in the market, if you've got the right plan, it doesn't matter. Okay? And the reason for that is that you can be protected against those downside risks in a number of ways. You can also make sure that you've got the income you need so that you can, just like when you're working or we're working, you can leave that money alone. All right? So we're going to be talking about how to do that this morning as well. Another one, and I've talked about it in the last couple of weeks, I've talked about it intermittently for years now, and that's of inflation risk. Ever since the Federal Reserve has moved to hold interest rates very low to try to spur economic growth, there's been the concern of when they ease that up, that inflation would in fact show up, and possibly even hyperinflation. And this was these were remarks even by Federal Reserve presidents in different, I think this was in Texas, in Austin, if I remember right, about a year and a half ago that this came up in commentary. So we know when the Fed is holding prices low the way they are, holding interest rates, I should say, low the way they are, that eventually, as they're starting to ease off now, we're seeing more recent reports. And there was one here recently reported from, I believe it was, I want to say Morgan Stanley, and they talked about the return of inflation. And their concerns are how high inflation can get. Yes, it was J.P. Morgan. So prepare for the return of U.S. inflation. J.P. Morgan, others see global prices, understand, spiking. So here in the United States, we've seen some of these price increases already in the things that we buy every day, and we've talked about that on the show before as well. So how do you protect yourself? If your money's sitting in the bank and it's earning 1% or less, how are you going to stay up when prices are increasing at 3 to 5%, or in some instances, depending on the type of expense, like health, food, gas, at an even faster rate? So that means that your money is losing its purchasing power if you park it in the bank. If you put it in the market, then we've got, again, capital market volatility, concerns about losing money if we put it in the bank. Now we're seeing it still lose. It doesn't look like it hasn't dropped in terms of what we see on the statement, but we know what we can buy with it has been reduced. And then finally, of course, liquidity risk, and that's making sure you got sufficient cash on hand so that when for emergencies, for planned expenses in the short term, that money's not tied up to where you can't get at it, or to get at it would create a penalty or a market drop, for instance, that type of thing. So we're going to cover all of that, and then we're going to give you some strategies. We're going to talk about those risks and then talk about ways that you can protect yourself and make sure that that's not going to hurt you leading into retirement, and of course when you are in retirement. We're going to talk about that, and I'm going to share some more things with you as soon as we return here on the Retirement Report.